We're here at Anglia-Ruskin University, and thank you for coming along. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the interest in longevity and why it's important at the moment in time. We're also going to touch on various other aspects around longevity, but we're not going to take a deep dive into nutrition today. That's not the point of this lecture. It's just sort of raise awareness of the issues around longevity. So where did it all start? Well, for us personally, there's been a lot of popularity in the press about longevity, especially around longevity research. There's also biohacking, where people are taking various substances to see if they can increase their lifespan and such. But arguably the most important thing that came up was a Netflix documentary on the blue zones. Has anyone seen that? Everyone's seen the blue zones? Well, pretty much. It's a really interesting perspective on the living environments around longevity, etc., etc. There's also been some very good newspaper headlines about longevity, and as a consequence of myself, Professor Roberts and myself decided to put out a conversation article, sort of test the water. And we got 94,000 reads just on that little article. So there's still quite a vested interest in longevity, and we think that's been increasing over recent years. So the question is can we live to 100? Well, I think we can, but it's much more complex than just saying, let's just live to 100. So we're going to try and dive slightly, or shallow dive, if you like, in some of the areas around longevity at present. If we look at longevity over the last couple of 100 years, we've seen a gradual increase over time. If we look at it in the UK over the last couple of decades, we can see that a reflection of the British population has also seen an increase in longevity. So on the left-hand side, you have men, and on the right-hand side, you have women over the last couple of decades. If you look at healthy life expectancy, which is the period in which we believe we are in good health, you can also see a slight rise going on. However, it's relatively flat. If we introduce people that feel they're in poor health, especially over the last 2 years, we can see a 2-year increase in poor health for men, despite a rise in longevity overall, which is on the orange bars. For women, we're seeing a 3-year increase in poor health. So you are living slightly longer, but this is exceeded by the period in which you're in poor health.
So, my name's Justin. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Anglia-Ruskin University. One thing that Mark didn't pick up on is these QR codes in the bottom right. So if you see them and you're a bit more interested and you want to dive into some of the literature, you can scan that and it will take you straight to that paper. If you don't worry. Just listen to us and enjoy it. So, why the interest? Mark's already covered that. My interest really started not necessarily with the Blue Zones documentary on Netflix, but it was actually this paper that caught my attention. So one of the first studies that I found was the ARU study from Sardinia, looking at centenarians, people that live beyond 100 in Sardinia specifically. It just so happens in a couple of months I'm going to Sardinia for a holiday, but I'm actually going, ironically, very close to the blue zone called Nuoro. I think that's how you say it. So I'm actually quite intrigued to go and find out for myself what this area looks like. So the ARU study, ARU stands for Akent Anos, which loosely translates, I believe, as health and life up to 100. And the researchers behind this found that, particularly Poulan and his group, that the reason it's called blue zones, by the way, does anyone know? It's because when they were marking the map with areas that had higher numbers of centenarians, they were using a blue pen. So if they were using a green pen, it might have been called a green zone, who knows? But it was quite interesting because Sardinia was already quite renowned as being a place where people were living beyond 100. I think the rate was something like 16.6 per 100,000. But in a particular area around the central eastern part of Nuoro, where it's quite rural, it's quite mountainous, they found that the rate was 17.9. It was higher. So why was that? Was it because this is an island? Maybe there's a genetic disposition, if you like. Maybe there's genetic protection going on in that particular cohort. Maybe it's more. Let's have a little look at Sardinia. Now, of course, we're not going to be able to cover everything There's a lot of things that go into longevity, but let's just have a little bit of fun and maybe speculating at what it could be. So when I looked at the blue zones, and yes, I've got my opinions, and I'm sure there are people in the audience that have seen the documentary will have the same as me. But what's interesting is that Sardinia boasts the longest living men on the planet, apparently. Why is it that these individuals are living to a long life, or having a long life? Could it be down to their tradition? They actually come from a traditional shepherding background, so maybe their diet is semi-nomadic, meaning it's quite basic foods, sourdough breads, soft cheeses, garden vegetables, these sort of natural foods that might have a role to play in giving them high quality food. Could it be down to maybe something called stress resilience? If you've ever been to Sardinia, I've only been to the south of Sardinia, but I am going to this part in a few months' time. It's quite interesting to note that these rural mountainous areas, the villages are actually quite steep. How many people here, hands up, go to a gym or do some sort of exercise every day? Every day. Maybe 3 times a week? Okay. We've got a bit of catching up to do. Okay. But if you can imagine, this is my road and I'm having to walk up these steps every day, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 times a day. What's that going to do to my muscles? How's that going to affect my physiology? Is that creating stress on me? But then couple that with, is there a degree of downtiming, downshifting, relaxing? Is there a balance between how much stress we're putting on our body versus how much we're relaxing and kind of dealing with that stress? So this stress resilience could be quite an important factor. In some of the literature I've seen, and certainly it was reported on the documentary, one of the things that these individuals do is have a daily happy hour. Has it got something to do with maybe the type of wine they're drinking? Who likes a glass of wine every now and then? Apparently, the Sardinian wine is quite rich in potent antioxidants, which might be quite protective for the human body. I'm not saying it's the only wine, but I'm certainly going to try it when I go there. So maybe it's not what they do, maybe it's how they do it. Maybe there's something there that we should be thinking about. That's one blue zone. What are the other blue zones? I'll pass over to Joe.
Good morning, everybody. So as Justin said, I'd just like to join the dots a little bit with some of the other existing blue zones that are out there at the moment. So since the success of the IKEA study, 4 other blue zones have been recognised and identified due to the prevalence of centenarians, so individuals that are living over 100, and even in some cases supercentenarians, so individuals that are reaching 110 years or more, which is rather impressive. Before we touch on that, I'd just like to draw your attention to the bottom right-hand side, the red writing here, 73 years. Now, this number indicates the estimated life expectancy from a global perspective. And we're just going to compare that to the estimated life expectancy, or what we think the life expectancy is, based on some data for these new 4 or current additional 4 blue zones. So first and foremost, one we've heard a little bit about already is Sardinia, based in Italy, currently boasting 82 years life expectancy. Secondly, move over to Greece, in particular Ikaria, trumping the rest of the crowd at 85. Okinawa in Japan at 84 years. The Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, South America at 85 years. And finally, Loma Linda in Los Angeles, California, which perhaps boasts one of the more regular or familiar landscapes out of the 5 up there. Now, with that in mind, just talking about the landscapes, if we can just do a verbal poll, perhaps. Now we put a name to a face. What comes to mind when we talk about when you can see these photos up there? Any raise of hand? Any consistencies we can see?
Rural?
Rural, yeah.
What other words come to mind?
Natural.
Natural, empty, okay.
Sea.
Sea, mountains, yeah. Weather, who said weather? Well done, yeah, weather. So maybe where you live, the climate.
I think we can agree it's some excellent locations, and we're very fortunate to live in those areas.
Notice nobody said across the middle. Oh, you did? Okay.
Right. Now, we will all like to go and live in these really nice areas by the sea. But here's a thought that are there any other areas that can be considered as blue zones? Or are there any other areas where people would live to 100 or more than 100 that might look like the places we live in? So if you look at that slide over there, you can see that areas like Australia, Canada, USA, also have people that might live to 100. Now, here's the question. Is it because of something that we have already looked at, or is it because of the population density? Because a lot of people will be living in New York, a lot of people will be living in Hong Kong. So is it just because they have a larger population density, or is it something else? And if you look at the prevalence rates over there, we can see that Japan has a prevalence rate of 0.06, and Hong Kong has a prevalence rate of 0.04. And when we compare that to the UK, it's 0.02. Not very good, is it? So, yeah, there are other zones that can be...
There's a question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Centenarian rates.
Per 100,000.
Per 100,000, yeah. So, yeah, can we look at other areas that don't look like the places we want to vacation in, where people might live to more than 100 or 100? Thank you.
So, let's have a deep dive into some of the other blue zones. What we're trying to say here is that even though there might be 5 acknowledged blue zones, maybe we're suggesting there are other places that also have capacity for people living beyond 100. It's not just these blue zones, is what we're trying to say. I should stress that this is kind of partly my opinion now. So this is me watching the blue zones and my kind of thinking behind the blue zones. But let's just start with 2 areas in particular where maybe they see food as kind of medicine. So if we look at Ikaria, Greece, where I would call them polyphenol superstars. Polyphenols are nutrients that you find in plants that may have significant health benefits. And in Ikaria particularly, there's a very diverse nature to the type of diet they eat. It's very natural. Things like tea, things like honey, things like salad vegetables, things like olive oil. All of these have very potent health benefits. So maybe there's something going on with the diversity in their diet that might be impacting maybe their gut health. Maybe some of the nutrients have potent anti-inflammatory mechanisms. Maybe some of those nutrients have an effect on reducing anxiety, depression, improving mood. I'm just saying. In places like Okinawa, they have an expression, I'm going to get this wrong, but I'll have a go, Nuchi Gazui, which loosely translates as let food be your medicine. And it's quite interesting because when you look at the diet in Okinawa, it often comes out of what I call a famine-based background. In other words, a lot of their staples probably came from when they didn't have certain food groups, so they had to grow certain foods, like sweet potatoes. Interesting enough, on the island of Okinawa, the consumption of sweet potatoes, particularly purple sweet potatoes, is significantly higher than Japan. Maybe this is contributing to the quality of their health. They also have other foods, for example, seaweed. I've not eaten seaweed. Well, maybe I have, maybe, I don't know actually. But kombu seaweed, aza seaweed, for example, is often used to combat the heat. It's very high in things like iodine and omega-3s and fiber, which are all important for our health. They have things like tofu, which is good in antioxidant isoflavones to protect the body. So is it, again, this idea that the food they're eating is not just one food, maybe it's a complex degree of food. They don't eat the same foods, if you notice. So when people say to me, oh, is there one thing that might help me live longer? Maybe not. Maybe it's a combination of things. Maybe it's specific to that region. The other thing I picked up on, and again, just show of hands, how many people here have actually watched the Netflix documentary at all? A handful, yeah? One thing I picked up on was this concept of social nutrition. And if we've got any social psychologists in the room, I know a couple, then you'll probably pick up on this as well. In both groups, you see this pattern where people share food together. They have more of a social nature to their diet. They'll eat as a family, or they'll eat in groups. In places like Okinawa, for example, there's a term, I think it's called moes, where they have a very close community of friends that help each other and work with each other and create that social structure. What leapt out to me when I watched the documentary was this idea that actually it's maybe the social side of our eating that might have an impact on how much we actually use from our diet. The Okinawans also have an expression, again, forgive me if I say this incorrectly, but hara hachibu, which loosely translates as 80% full. Have you ever wondered, when you eat your food, do you eat, I was brought up on when you eat your food, you eat everything. Even if you're full, just keep on eating. But they have a saying which is, eat until you're about 80% full, then stop. In some respects, that could be construed a bit of caloric reduction. They're not overeating. Likewise, with Ikaria, there's a sense of time. Maybe they're not eating first thing in the morning. Maybe they're eating quite late at night. So maybe they've got an element of time-restricted feeding going on. So food is medicine could be one of those secrets. If we look at two other areas, particularly Joe mentioned Nicoya, the peninsula of Nicoya. There was also another one, Loma Linda, in California. In these two regions, you see the kind of concept of whether it's cultural or whether it's faith-based. So when I say faith, we're not going to get into a conversation on religion, but they are now renowned for being Seventh-day Adventists, and they have particular belief systems. But in places like Nicoya, there's a cultural heritage. You'll see people well into their 80s, 90s, even hundreds, cooking with their families regularly, daily. They're engaged with the concept. There's a concept called the Three Sisters, which basically is corn, squash, and beans. I would actually say there's four sisters because they also eat rice. But these natural whole grains, these natural foods might be protective. There's been research showing that the consumption of these foods might be important for protecting your chromosomes via telomere length. And telomeres are the ends of your chromosomes, and they do shorten the more stress you have in your life and as we age. But if you've got longer telomeres, this might be protective. And there's an association between the type of foods in Nicoya and telomere length, which might partly explain their longevity. It's also interesting they eat quite a lot of tubers, natural root foods, root vegetables. These are low glycemic, which means they're not getting the sugar rush that you might see in Western diets. Their sugars come from natural sources of fruits, papaya, for example, which might mean that they're not snacking on high sugary foods throughout the day because they're getting natural sugars. Could be. In Loma Linda, maybe it's because they're not focusing on processed foods, and we could have a whole discussion here around processed and even ultra-processed foods and the dangers and damages that these foods might cause. But in Loma Linda, their diet is very mixed. Originally, it's been pitched that they're on a lacto-ovo-vegetarian diet, which basically means a vegetarian diet with dairy as well. I would slightly challenge that because, again, some of the literature I've read and some of the other documentaries I've seen suggest that it's not just down to the diversity in their diet. They do actually have some meat as well. But the key word is moderation. In both countries, on both areas, and the other blue zones, what you see is foods being consumed in moderation. Interesting enough also, with Loma Linda, there is an element of exercise when it comes up. Oh, there you go. Exercise daily. So when you look at this community, there's an engagement in being physically active. So those people that put their hands up, that go to the gym, on average, how long would you go to the gym for? An hour? 2 hours? 2 hours? Well done. Anyone above?
In the gym, I'm doing dance or Pilates or
something. Okay, but you're active.
About 2 hours a day.
Yeah, so you can imagine doing that for a large percentage of the day. And for those that watched the Netflix documentary, did you notice the people from Okinawa? They don't have chairs, they're squatting and standing and squat. I can't even do 20 squats at the moment. I'm getting old. But can you imagine doing that through your 80s, your 90s, even into your 100s? You're using your body naturally all day long. So I picked up on that when I looked at these areas. So it could be an element of plant-based diet, but not fully. It could be a question of their background heritage and their culture. It could be down to their belief systems and their faith. It could be down to the diversity of their diet. So I tried to pull this together with Mark and look at what we felt were the commonalities when you look across the blue zones. And what we picked up on was, number one, the foods seem to be self-produced. They're grown, they're natural. They have a high degree of nutrient richness. They don't have to walk over to a local supermarket and pick up something in a packet. So they're getting better quality food. That could be important. And for some of the areas, there's effort required in cultivating that food and picking it, growing it. There's an element of antioxidants in the diet. We've mentioned plant-based richness, but also we didn't touch on things like tea and coffee. Tea within Korea, but you see coffee drinking in other places, which is also potent in antioxidant protection. Maybe the degree of red wine. I'm looking at my colleague in the front row here, Portuguese young man over here who drinks not a lot of wine, but he knows an awful lot about wine. And he'll tell you about the potent antioxidants of the different grapes. Maybe there's something to do with the antioxidant richness here. The type of carbohydrates. If it's low glycemic, it's going to have potentially better effects on your metabolism. Maybe this has important effects on our gut health as well. And there's been direct studies showing the link between gut health and longevity. Moderation. When people say it's all about plant-based diet, I would disagree. In every single blue zone, there is an element of meat eating at some degree, whether that's pork, whether that's other poultry, whether that's fish as well. It's not excessive, it's in moderation. Same as the wine, it's in moderation. Sorry for those that like a lot of wine, but the suggestion is that it's about moderation. Has it got anything to do with how the foods are consumed? We mentioned about this idea of eating at home with your family. We've this idea of a social diet, spending more time eating. I used to work in professional sport, and I can tell you that I've watched a lot of athletes have their meals. I'm just going to look over at Joe here as an athlete. How quickly they eat their food. What's that doing to their digestion? Are they getting their nutrients out of their food that they need? Slowing down, taking your time, is that an important factor? There's also the energy balance factor. When you look at the different blue zones, it's quite interesting to note these individuals are active throughout the day. Now, we all know that you burn energy when you exercise, but what about when you're not physically exercising, you're active, you're still using your body, you have what's called non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or NEAT. So are they increasing their levels of NEAT? And what impact is that having as well? In some of the countries and some of the zones, we see this concept of time-restricted feeding or calorie reduction. That might also have a role to play. It's interesting because Dan Boetner, who's one of the journalists behind the Blue Zones diet, he put up a lovely little slide at the end of his presentation, or on the oh, that's the complex one, on the documentary, which tried to summarize what brings these blue zones together. And it's quite similar to our thinking, which is move naturally as a core component. Plant-based diet in moderation. In other words, have foods that you like, but in moderation. The connection and family. He mentions a lot more of this in the documentary. And he talks about having a positive outlook and the stress balance, which we also picked up on. So our observations are somewhat similar, but we have a few others, I hope, on that slide. So let's get to the heavy slide and just take a moment to pause. Let's think about this from a science perspective. Now, I apologize in advance if this is a little bit complex. I'll try and not make it complex. There's a very good paper, if you're interested in this subject and you want to really delve into the science behind it, lovely paper by Longo and Anderson published in 2022 in Cell, looking at a pro-longevity diet. They're very much looking at this idea of fasting, and particularly prolonged fasting, as a way of switching on some of the mechanisms that allow you to potentially live longer. Now, what's interesting for me is this idea that as we age, one of the reasons we age is because we get this chronic cellular hyperfunction. That sounds complex. What it's basically telling me is that we get dysfunction or dysregulation. Things like the metabolism starts to go a bit haywire. Maybe we've got a bit more stress than we can cope with, so we produce chemicals that start damaging the body a little bit, oxidative damage. Or maybe it's down to inflammation. Maybe there's a bit more prolonged inflammation. So this idea of chronic cellular hyperfunction could be quite critical in how we stave off or how we defend against aging. And what he proposes is this idea of a longevity diet that's tailored or individualized to the person based on their genetics, their size, maybe their age, their sex, and their health status. Now, if we cross-reference that to some of the blue zones, we come up with some quite interesting facts. So at the top there, what he's saying is, or what the authors are saying, is if you have a lot of animal fat, sugar, and animal protein in excess maybe, they can be negative, potentially, on some of these mechanisms. If we flip that and we have a diet that is largely unrefined, largely plant-based, not totally, then it could be, for example, that we've got more fibre going in. We've got more plant-based nutrients going in, and these can have an effect, as we mentioned, on our gut, our blood sugar control. Maybe we've got more natural sugars, so therefore we're snacking less throughout the day. Hands up if you have a little snack at 11 o'clock or 3 o'clock, maybe with a cup of tea and a biscuit or 2 or 5 or 10, maybe. So could it be that we've got better quality carbohydrates going in? If we exert some form of minor calorie reduction, whether that is eating a little bit less than we are used to, whether that's doing a fasting type approach, whether it's time-restricted feeding, this idea of having a small caloric reduction can impact certain mechanisms on the body that start to switch on something called autophagy. Autophagy just means how our cells start to deal with damage, keeping it simple. So there are studies showing the link between calorie reduction, reduced inflammation, antioxidant protection, and autophagic mechanisms. In other words, it's trying to help the body deal with damage. On the other hand, we can look at the fats and proteins in our diets, particularly the fats. If we look at the certain types of fats that we eat, particularly the good fats that give us things like omega-3s, they can be quite protective in the body, particularly when it comes to inflammation, nutrient uptake into our cells. And if we also look at where it says PR diet, this means a protein-restricted diet. And this is where it gets a little bit contentious. Because on the one hand, if we have too much protein, it stimulates growth, or mechanisms behind growth. But just maybe restricting that protein and not overdoing it actually starts to balance some of the pathways that lead to protection. So it could be a combination of plant-based nutrients, calorie reduction, and omega-3s and protein balance. But equally so, we also have to acknowledge two other areas. One of them is lifestyle. I've mentioned about the blue zones where they're highly active. So this micro movement throughout the day might be quite protective on the body. Maybe there's less stress or a stress resilience, which is impacting how people are coping. Maybe they have better heart rate variability. Maybe it's where they're living, the sunlight. Some of you mentioned about being on the equator. If there's more sunlight, you're getting more exposure to things like vitamin D. What impact does that have? But we also need to mention or remember that everyone here is individual. The way we digest our foods, the way we metabolize our foods is highly individual. So that is something we also need to consider. We also need to think about genetics. There are some papers that report that genetics might explain somewhere between 25 and 30% of our longevity, and certain genes, particularly the FOXO genes or the ApoE gene, might be quite prevalent in supporting that. But for me, the take-home message from this is, whilst the science is emerging and certainly supportive of this, we should remember that the diet for one population doesn't necessarily match the lifestyle of another. So if I suddenly go and eat an Okinawan diet, am I going to live longer? Maybe not. But the quality of the food I eat and how long I do it for could be quite important. So I suppose the ultimate question is diet the answer? What do you think?
No, it's much more complex than that, Justin.
So you're going to go much more complex. What do you think? Is diet the answer? Partly. Okay. This is a lovely study that was published in 2022 in PLOS Med, looking at what happens. This is a kind of theoretical model, but it has been replicated on other model studies as well. But this is what we call, well, it's not a meta-analysis. This is a plot looking at what happens theoretically if I change the diet away from increasing certain foods but reducing other foods. And what they've got on this slide here is the question around an optimum diet versus a feasible diet. So if you look at the top of this one, this is actually based for a 60-year-old female, by the way. And if you read the paper, they also do it for men, and they do it for younger individuals as well. But if we have legumes in our diet, what they're saying here is if I increase the amount of legumes I eat from nothing to 200 grams, I think it is, you can see the life years gained at the bottom there is roughly around 2. If I make it a little bit more feasible, which means it's somewhere between an optimum diet and a westernized diet, then we might add about a year, just on legumes, eating more legumes in our diet. If you look at the bottom of that slide where it says processed meat, what they're saying here is if I reduce the amount of red meat or processed meat, that can also equal a potential increase in life expectancy. And when we put it all together, the suggestion is if I start young, and that's probably a key message, it could have an accumulated benefit over your life. That doesn't mean to say that if I'm my age or older, you're not going to get the benefit. You still can get benefits. And in fact, if we start with the feasible diet here, the suggestion is that if I start at the age of 20, go back. If I start at the age of 20, the suggestion is that I might be able to, via my diet, increase my life expectancy by 7%. Doesn't sound much, but that might translate somewhere between 6 and 7 years. On a feasible diet, not an optimum diet. The optimum diet suggests that we might be able to increase by 13 years max. That's a theoretical model. There are studies, there was one recently done by Zazaki, looking at what happens if we look at countries around the world where there's populations in excess of 1 million, and they looked at 130 countries and found that if those countries that were more in line with a Mediterranean-style diet were more likely going to have an increase in life expectancy, but it was lower. It was about 4 years. More importantly, they showed in that research that the healthy life expectancy might equally be improved as well. So let's just think about that concept of life expectancy versus healthy life expectancy. And I'll pass back to Mark.
Thanks, Justin. Okay, so living to 100, we sort of outlined is quite a complex issue. If we go and change our diet overnight, it's going to be a minimal effect on our health. It's going to take some time to acclimatise to. We also have to take into account that if we're going to change our diet, we also need to take into account other barriers to introducing that diet or introducing that diet in the first place. So for instance, many people that I've worked with on diets, they find it very hard to implement a change in diet for a long term, for a sustainable period of time, because for instance, they work. They get home, they don't want to cook. So they find it very hard to integrate something, or at least for the long term. That's why it's several programs, you'll see commercial programs run for about 12 weeks. They get reasonable weight loss for a period of time. And over 3 to 5 years, it's expected that you'll regain or return to your pre-dietary weight within 3 to 5 years. We can also see that there's a significant relationship between our urban environment, for instance, where we live, how we live. Is there access to, say, exercise facilities and such like? Also, when we're talking about a gym, which Justin touched on earlier, there's also the issue of social. How many people go to the gym and talk to other people in the gym? 3 people, 4, 5 people? Okay, so it's common, if you look at the other countries we explored earlier, that when they do exercise, whether it's enforced, such as going to a gym, or they're walking around, for instance, they're talking to people quite regularly. Also, we've talked about sociability around food. So, for instance, it's shown that when women eat with men, they're inclined to increase and take in more food during that period of time than they would do if they were on their own. There's restricted access to healthcare and medical care, and this is one of the things that actually underpins the increase in poor health in the UK. There's also issues of increased alcohol intake, and there's still smoking issues in the UK as well that have shown that they're impacting on that poor health issue. There's also levels of deprivation in the UK, for instance. So the data, the charts I showed you earlier, was only the forefront of what's going on behind, which is a much more complex issue. So for instance, between the least and most deprived areas within the UK, there's a 19.7-year difference in healthy life expectancy. There's also an average reduction in mortality risk per additional year of education as well. So how well you're educated also impacts on how long you will live. So for instance, the better educated we become, the more chance we get a higher salary, our social groups change, our living area and environment changes as a consequence. So it's not just a case of nutrition. If you're going to, though your focal point may be on nutrition, it's a far more complex area. Right, so what are the take-home messages from this longevity and nutrition talk today? Well, it's a focus on risk reduction. So we can talk about life expectancy and healthy life expectancy, but overall it's an issue of risk. If you look at some of the populations we've explored earlier, they live in environments where there's reduced risk, okay, reduced exposure over time to certain consequences that can lead, for instance, to things such as cardiovascular disease and cancers and such like. There's also the diet and activity combo as well. It's making sure that when you do diet, you exercise regularly. I'm not talking about a forced diet, but you keep active. And one of the most fundamental issues to come out of all the research we've explored today is there's a sense of purpose. Ikigai. There's a sense of purpose. It's making sure you have a goal, or you achieve, or you drive forward all the time. If you're at the point of despondency where you don't really feel like there's no point in continuing, that has been shown to influence your longevity. Start young. So everyone here, forget it. No, yeah, absolutely. If you start young, yeah, obviously you can see an increased improvement. But at the end of the day, it's never too late to start. I'm sure you can tell me that message anyway. It's never too late to start. You should always keep active, and yeah, if you've got a chance, start whenever you want. Plant-based polyphenols are really important. So we're not talking about a forced substitution to a vegetarian diet, for instance, but we are talking about increased veg intake. Now, there's other issues associated with veg intake, such as fertilizer, intrusion into our foods and such like, which we're not covering today. But at the end of the day, fundamentally, if you increase your veg intake, it has shown to be beneficial to your health. There's Hara-Hachi-Bu, which we spoke about earlier, which is time-restricted feeding practices and calorific restriction or hypercalorific approaches. Now, a lot of the research about calorie restriction and time-restricted feeding practices is still in its infancy. So the claims by some people that it can cure cancer and stuff like that are not really there yet. The research is not there yet. But it does show that there can be some improvement in health if you move into a time-restricted feeding pattern. Okay, well, I'd like to say thank you very much for having us along today. Thank you for joining us. If you'd like to email us, feel free. Please take a photo of our email address if you want to discuss these issues further, or you want some feedback, or you want to dive a little bit deeper into the subject area. I'd like to say thank you to Justin.
Got the poll next.
Yeah, you've got a poll next, yeah. Hania and Joe. Sorry, I lost track. We've got a poll next. If you could just hang around for that, that would be really, really good. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
So just, we wanted to try and get the talk done early, so it's more about you now, not us, and we've got a bit of time. So if you can log on to this poll, you've got the QR code there, or you've got the link at the bottom, menti.com, and the code if you want to get in. Okay,
nice. So we'll flick through some of the results quickly, see what people have thoughts, feelings, emotions. You notice this first question, just a repetition from the one that some of you filled in to begin with coming in. So initially we had 17 yeses and 6 no's, so perhaps not everyone jumped on it straight away. But we're seeing a lot more yeses come up. So take from that what you will, perhaps. That's a good thing, whether it's resonated with you or whether you thought that anyway, that's interesting. Biggest contributor to living longer. So good. I think that's a key message that's come across, and it looks like that one has stuck in people's minds, a combination of the above. Interesting, no one's gone for the small glass of wine daily. Justin might have. Might have scared some of you off there.
Seriously?
Honesty is the best policy, so don't let that deter you from going home and enjoying one this evening.
Oh, it's still going up?
It's still going up. So good. Not smoking, I'm glad that one's on there. So blue zone was, if we were to set a blue zone up in Cambridge, which of the following is support engagement? This is a really interesting question for us because this has actually been attempted in a town in Michigan, in America. And again, some of those of you that watched the documentary may well have realised that. It was relatively successful, so it's interesting to see what people's thoughts are around this. I'd say we're very fortunate as to where we live, or where the majority, I presume the most of us live, in that Cambridge is a very accessible area anyway. But where are we with this one? Adjusted, more flexible work-life balance. I'd say that's pretty consistent across the board. Evidence-based nutrition information, that's interesting. I think we can delve a little bit more into that. Anyone who went for that, what are the thoughts around that? Anyone who selected the evidence-based nutrition information? Any thoughts? Radio silence, that's okay. We can have more of a conversation when we finish up with this one. The idea of nutrition confusing. Okay. Interesting, okay. Perhaps not what we expected.
It's what I expected.
That is what you expected?
Yeah. Yeah. It is confusing. You get mixed messages all the time, don't you? It is very confusing. And then, literally, because I've been studying diets for years, and you'll get a diet out one day, and then another day you'll get another diet that claims, it is confusing.
Okay. And then finally, which ways can nutrition-based information be improved? The wider availability of healthy foods.
No.
I think we'd agree with that.
Did they? Did I read it wrong?
Yeah, can you read out each one?
Pardon?
Just read it out, which one?
What ways can nutritional-based information be improved? And it looks like the take-home here is the wider availability of healthy foods.
Any other ones?
Yeah, I think the food industry should be better regulated because we're all marketed to all the time. And the kids, especially these days, are marketed to with junk food all the time.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Agreed. Additional nutrition focus in schools as well. That's interesting.
I think that resonates quite clearly with one of the take-home messages that we found that Mark mentioned. Starting early would be the best option. So therefore, perhaps the differences in curriculum could be a key factor there.
Could that be
Homing curriculum?
That's where the questions come out.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. I think that comes almost that's the chicken and the egg scenario, right? Where do we start the education platform? I think overall, if as a nation, as a community, if the general education increases and that's fed forward by the younger generation, I think ultimately the overall picture becomes a lot better. Now this is good. A healthy life. We'll ignore those two. Maybe perhaps they came to the wrong talk. That's okay. No, look, thank you very much, guys. I think we will have time to open for some questions.
Yeah, so we tried to wrap it up early so that we can get over to you now. So if you have any questions for any of the team, including
I think so.
and oh my God, we're going to get inundated. So let's start with the first hand that went.
Oh, yeah.
I just was wondering if there's data about where you look at the blue zones, how many of the people that live there have always lived there? So the genetics is imprinted in that.
Yeah.
The only example was the California one where I would assume that.
If anyone asks you a question from the audience,
So just to repeat that question for the online viewers. To summarise, I think the question was, how many of the individuals that live in these blue zone diets have lived there from birth? How many have lived there for the entirety of their life?
Well, and historically.
And historically. Okay, generational, sure.
This is a really interesting question because the first thing, once I finished watching the Netflix documentary, and it was a good documentary, it really opened my awareness and my thinking and kind of what other thoughts were out there. But I started to look into this a bit more. And the answer to your question is the traditional blue zones, yes. But now, if you look at places like Okinawa, we're seeing maybe longevity not as high as it used to be because of maybe shifts in westernisation maybe. Maybe there's a younger generation coming through that have got different ideas about longevity or around nutrition. So I think we're seeing a shift in those blue zones, which is why we wanted to put up the slide to show that there are other areas like New York, like Australia, that may have high rates of centenarians as well. But to answer your question, yes, it probably does. Yeah. There was a question somewhere over here. I don't know who. Let's go here then here.
It was just my slight worry, and it's all very encouraging, and I follow this sort of thing from not young enough, but from a good 30 years ago, except for the restriction. I could do it for hours, but if I'd say I eat far too much. The worry is about whether or not not only young people, as the gentleman said here, are getting more influence as to what being fed, the food industry as such, is saying, oh, this looks, and because it tastes good, so you eat more, and it's maybe not good for you. But also about pollution and other things, because if you say, well, it's always, I felt good to eat fish, less meat, vegetables, and what, if you're looking at fertilisers that are used on the land, if you're looking at the pollution in our oceans and everything else.
You can't hear it? Okay. Is it on?
Basically about pollution with eating fish and healthy things like that in the oceans, and also with that's better put, with fertiliser and things that are used on the land. Besides the fact that the younger generation, with those people that are in those places, they are lived to that age because of more westernised lifestyle. Just thoughts on.
Thoughts here? Was there a question there, or just a statement?
I'm just worried that the results so far are based on, the last 100 years, the people that are 100 now.
Yeah.
As opposed to what.
And where's it going?
Predict to be.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on whether or not all the things that we're learning are relative because of pollution and other things?
I think that the thing is, the change into factors such as ultra-processed foods has been relatively quick. So though we've been eating those foods quite, for around 30 or 40 years, what we're finding now is more the fact is that we're beginning to see the consequences of those. So there was a really nice piece of work out this week alone, was talking about UPFs or ultra-processed foods, about the impact on the body and such like. So I think the science is there, but I think it's going to take a while. But also, you're absolutely right about pollution, fertilisers, what we put in our foods and such like. It's all going to have some effect on us, and it's shown that they do have an effect on us. But that's going to, over time, we're going to develop a greater understanding of those things. I think it touches on our earlier slides about complexity around change. So it's not just a case of trying to live to 100, it's also trying to live healthily to 100. Which was surprising, because I got the slide wrong, but which was quite surprising to see people think that nutrition is quite a simple concept. I see it as a relatively complex concept. And I think perhaps that message is getting through to people, and that's an improvement as well, because if you go back 10 or 20 years ago, people found nutrition and diet quite a complex issue. It was quite really hard to understand. But I think people are becoming somewhat more aware now. So I think the more we learn and the more we develop over time, I think there will be increased pressure on industry and such like to address it. When we come out of the EU, for instance, we didn't adopt many of their agricultural rules either. So as a consequence of that, we, certain fertilisers and pesticides are getting back into our foods again, which we were not expecting. So that again, you won't see that now, you'll see 10, 20 years' time, you may see the effects of that. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Okay, so we'll go over here, then to the middle, then the back, just so we've got it noted.
Just a question about the influence of sleep and sleep patterns.
Do you want to answer that one?
Oh, hello, here we go. Yes, there's only so much we can cover in the time, but yeah, we know that if you have poor sleep, that's going to impact on appetite mechanisms, it's going to affect on hunger mechanisms as well. So you start to change your dietary patterns because of a poor sleep or a lack of sleep. Yes, that has a role to play. Interesting enough, when you read around the blue zones areas, you pick up on this idea of circadian patterns. That I was quite intrigued by people taking naps throughout the day as well. So whilst we're talking about lack of sleep having a negative impact, having naps in the day had a positive impact. So there's kind of that balance between the two that came out from the literature. Interesting idea.
Just touching on that, it's also a cultural thing as well. So it's presumed that obviously as we get older we'll have more naps in the day and such like, but arguably there's some good evidence to show that actually at a younger age as well it's very good for stress reduction. And yet culturally we don't see naps as being a favourable approach, do we? Because we work, we go to work at 9 o'clock or whatever it is, we go home at 5:30, we don't have time for naps in the day, we're working. And so that siesta, which we often see, is possibly, you know, is shown to have benefits in regards to reduction in stress and such like.
Okay, so we're going to just go to the middle here.
Thank you very much. It's been a wonderful presentation. Thank you. I've been in search for the perfect diet for decades. I'm in this field as well, and every day I'm shocked at the publications, at the influencers, at the podcasts. I keep listening and listening of someone who found the perfect diet. And through my experience, I see that at the end of the day, things like exercise, sleep, and probably with removing 5 things from our diet, we're going to improve our life a lot more than trying to follow a very strict diet. That's my experience. I know, and I've been following Longo for a long time, and I know that on paper it looks impressive. We can get rid of cancer, neurological disorders, cardiovascular disease. But then I wonder, if we are going to go for that approach that is vegan practically, what about micronutrients? He hasn't done any long-term study to show what's happening when we have maybe a person living after 50, 60 years on that kind of diet. What's going to happen when they have, because they are going to finish with deficiencies at the end of the day. I mean, it's been shown the deficiencies that can have. So my experience is that just trying to improve our sleep, trying to improve our social environment, of course, trying to have friends, and all the social aspects is very important. Exercise, and I'm a person who really, I'm a late exerciser. I only started exercising probably 5 years ago. And I cannot believe the results. And removing just probably 5 things, the most important things, I think that we can achieve a lot more than going mad about following an approach. That's my
I would 100% agree with that. I'd love to ask you what the 5 things are.
Well, I would remove the sugar, I would greatly reduce the alcohol, and after a certain age, I really reduce it, mostly if you start taking certain medication. Salt is another one. Definitely, you have to, I would go for well, of course, ultra-processed foods, and I remove dairy, mostly milk, and not other dairy. And what else? Well, refined carbohydrates, that kind of thing. So those are the ones.
There's definitely an overlap between that and the presentation.
Yeah, no, of course. I completely agree with that.
But I'm 100% behind the exercise. Obviously, we didn't cover everything today, but exercise, you think about it, you know, we lose muscle very quickly from around mid-30s onwards, particularly mid-50s onwards. And the whole risk of frailty, particularly sarcopenic frailty, is a real issue. So it's not just about eating good quality foods, you have to use your muscles. And that's what struck me about places like Sardinia, where you've got these elderly gentlemen that are walking up these very steep hills at a pace, I hasten to add, and you've got the Okinawans that are gardening hours a day. And that natural exercise, that natural movement is probably fundamental to not losing their muscle mass, or at least not losing their strength. So well done. Yeah, I picked up on that. And balance as well, yeah. We had a question right at the back there.
Probably time for just one more question.
Oh, have we? Okay.
We'll do let's go for this one. We can read out some of the online ones after this.
Thanks.
What are your thoughts
So the question for the rest of the audience is, what are our thoughts on hydroponic farming for the availability of foods?
I'm not an expert in hydroponic farming, I'm afraid, so I can't really comment on that. I think in regards to, as long as you've got the nutrient content maintained in the soil and such like, I think one of the reasons for hydroponic farming, you may need to correct me, is to make sure that we don't lose any soil mineral content and such like. Plus we can also produce higher quantities of veg within a smaller area. That's my understanding of it. Is that correct? I'm sure you can all correct me. As to the nutrient content, I'm not really sure at this moment in time. I don't know if anyone else knows about the micronutrient content of those foods. No? Yeah, I'm afraid it's not really my area, I'm afraid. Sorry.
Just got an online question here. So apologies, not sure who this is from, but JR, proteins. As people age, their muscles deteriorate. Does slightly restricting protein still apply to the people that are getting older, or should they increase their protein intake at this time?
Whoever asked that question at home, thank you. This is the dilemma I've got scientifically going on in my head at the moment. So on the one hand, as we age, and sadly it's happening to me and as I get older, but we start to develop anabolic resistance. So the muscles become a little bit more resistant to protein uptake. So one of the theories, and it's kind of been shown now, that a lovely paper by Dan Moore demonstrating that, you know, for younger people, the whippersnappers that exercise in their 20s and 30s, they can get away with relatively low amounts of protein. Maybe after exercise, 20 grams is kind of the number that's often quoted. But as we get a bit older, maybe that protein intake goes up to try and stimulate the very mechanisms that stimulate muscle protein synthesis. There's also certain amino acids like L-leucine that also trigger the muscle as well. So maybe there's a kind of question around how much protein we need and whether we can enhance the process as we get older. But that's all to do with stimulating muscle growth. The other side of it is if you overstimulate that pathway, does it have a negative impact as well? So there's kind of a balance, I think, between how much protein is going in and when not to eat protein. So maybe it's about the timing of the food that's quite relevant. So that's a good question for whoever asked that at home. Thank you.
Any more?
A nice conversation article about that as well, I think, somewhere.
There's a lovely article we've just written in the conversation about this as well. Thanks for prompting it.
Time for one more, is that? Yeah, we'll go for one more online question.
I'll do this one.
So I think that one's quite...
If it's in my area.
Okay, test my eyesight. So, is the reality of centenarians achievable for UK residents, given the difference in the climate, diet, and work compared to the blue zone countries?
Oh, I'm going to put this to the audience. What do you think? So the question was, could people in the UK live beyond 100, comparable, if you like, to the blue zones? What do you think?
Well, we also
You've gone like that?
We also have the help from the pharmaceutical company as well to help us a bit.
Yeah, so different medical support, yeah.
And there are very few hills in Cambridge.
Very, unfortunately. There's a couple just in Hertfordshire, but not biggies, yeah.
I think there has to be a cultural change, because if you look at through COVID, where people kind of slowed down and kind of went to nature and did all the stuff because they had the time, and I was hoping that that would continue, and it has, in my view, it's gone back on the kind of treadmill, yeah. So it is a cultural change, I think, what we need.
Any other thoughts?
So the thoughts from the audience there for the people online was the general consensus seems to be a cultural change may be required. We had a very good point about the lack of hills in Cambridgeshire, but in general the change back post-COVID has meant people have rushed back to work and almost forgotten some of the fundamental components that they were allowed when they had time to focus on health, well-being, and family, perhaps.
Cool. Yeah.
Meal times, they're not really a community event, or it's not like we go with people and have a meal and chat. It's very like, let's get a meal deal, let's sit in a corner and eat it. So there is a cultural thing, because if you're isolated, food is a big thing. You could either go towards overeating or you could go towards undereating. So it really depends on how you're feeling. So yeah, it's a cultural thing. It's not, it won't always be how much you eat. It would sometimes just be overeating could also be a part of isolation. You're just sitting there, you don't have anything to do, you don't have anyone to talk to, so you're just snacking, eating, watching TV and things. Or you could just be you don't feel like eating, so there, you're undernourished. So yeah, cultural thing, community-based events, so all of that.
I think the answer is yes, but there's other factors such as our environment that we live in as well. So our urbanised environment would need to change significantly. So we've got more access to exercise, more cycle lanes, for instance, more activities to playgrounds for our kids. You need to change the educational approaches as well, so that kids learn early on about the necessity of certain nutrients and foods and such like. They don't get that really. They get some very good food support.
And how to cook.
Absolutely, and that's a really important point. It's how to cook decent food, you know, okay, unless you're a student, of course. And then...
Don't look at me.
I have no evidence to support this statement, but he reckons that about 20% of people are cooking now, and the rest just buy prepared.
Yeah, it's so much easier.
I mean, I don't know how good that data is.
No, that sounds about right. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. So that's a cultural shift. We're moving into that more delivering food now rather than cooking it type thing. So I think that all those things, it's not just a cultural issue, it's changing the environment in which we live in the first place. So the question which I'm going to leave open is the fact is if you picked us up and dropped us in Okinawa, for instance, would that improve our longevity? Purely because of the environment that we're dropped into rather than our approach. And perhaps that's an experiment for the future. Let's all go to Okinawa.
So I'm very conscious of time. You may have other talks you want to get to today. So first and foremost, may I thank the team behind me.
Thank you.
And of course, the team at the side for doing all the media. And lastly, of course, Anglo-Ruskin University for hosting the event, along with Cambridge University.
Oh, and yourself. You forgot yourself.
And if you have any other questions, we're going to stay behind. I know that you might have other things to go to, but thanks for your time and attention. Hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.